April 6, 1945. Off the coast of Okinawa, in the East China Sea. Dawn lights up Task Force 58 of the United States Fifth Fleet. Sailors on radar picket destroyers stationed 16 miles from the main fleet scan the horizon, aware of what's on the way. In the Combat Information Center of the USS Laffey, radar operators monitor incoming contacts, hundreds, not just dozens. The ship's 5-inch gun crews prepare shells marked with cryptic VT codes, each containing miniaturized radio transmitters that would change naval warfare forever. The stakes are high. They must endure Operation Kikusui No. 1, the first of 10 large-scale coordinated kamikaze assaults. At 0600 hours, the sky is filled with aircraft. Through the morning mist comes a sound that will define the Battle of Okinawa. The sound of hundreds of Japanese aircraft engines approaches in waves. Pilots are locked in their cockpits with no plans to return. Leading the charge is a pilot from the Imperial Japanese Navy's Special Attack Units, accompanied by their Zero fighters and Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bombers, each loaded with 250-kilogram bombs, followed by older planes repurposed for suicide missions. Among them are specially trained Oka pilots, sealed inside rocket-powered flying bombs carried by Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers. What unfolds next will showcase the groundbreaking effects of American proximity fuse technology and explain why the initially devastating Japanese kamikaze tactics would ultimately falter against the most advanced anti-aircraft systems ever used. A small radio transmitter receiver that emitted continuous radio waves and measured their returning frequency. When the Doppler shift indicated closeness to a target, the fuse would automatically detonate the shell. Gunners would no longer need to estimate exact distances or set mechanical timers. The shell would know exactly when to detonate. The technical challenges were immense. The fuse's parts, including tiny glass vacuum tubes made by Sylvania, needed to endure acceleration forces of 20,000 times gravity when fired from a 5-inch gun. The projectile would travel at 2,600 feet per second while spinning at 25,000 revolutions per minute through the gun's rifling. Each component had to work flawlessly after this intense launch and then function reliably in temperatures ranging from 100 degrees to -50 degrees Fahrenheit. By April 1945, American factories had manufactured over 15 million proximity fuses for naval operations in the Pacific Theater, with production spread across various contractors. Crosley Corporation alone manufactured 5,200,913 fuses, accounting for 24% of the total. RCA, Eastman Kodak, General Electric, and McQuay Norris, along with 87 other companies operating 110 factories, were involved in various production stages. This extensive industrial effort ensured that American troops at Okinawa were supplied with the most advanced anti-aircraft ammunition ever developed. The United States Navy increased the allocation of proximity fuses from 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition in 1943 to 75% by 1945. This shift acknowledged that the combat in the Pacific Theater against kamikaze attacks required groundbreaking defensive capabilities. Every destroyer, cruiser, and battleship was equipped with thousands of VT-fused 5-inch shells as their main line of defense against suicide attacks. In sharp contrast was Japan's kamikaze program, which stemmed from a sense of desperation. After devastating losses in the Marianas and the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Japan found itself with a depleted pool of skilled pilots and aircraft carriers. In October 1944, Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, commander of the 1st Air Fleet, suggested creating special attack units, claiming that traditional tactics were no longer effective against the superior firepower of the Americans. The Kamikaze initiative aimed to turn Japan's remaining inexperienced pilots into precision-guided weapons. The calculations appeared promising, especially since conventional attacks only managed a mere 2% success rate against heavily fortified American vessels. In the early stages of kamikaze attacks in the Philippines, the success rate surpassed 34%. A lone pilot in a Zero fighter, armed with a 250-kilogram bomb, could sink or severely damage a destroyer, sacrificing one life and one outdated aircraft in exchange for hundreds of American casualties and millions of dollars in destroyed warships. The kamikaze pilots received condensed training that focused more on spiritual readiness than on flying skills. Many had fewer than 100 hours of flight experience, compared to the 500 or more hours that their predecessors had at Pearl Harbor. They learned essential navigation, ship identification, and, most importantly, the final dive approach designed to avoid anti-aircraft fire. Before their missions, the pilots wrote farewell letters, took part in ceremonial rituals, and were given samurai swords or rising sun headbands. No amount of spiritual readiness could prepare them for the technological upheaval they were about to face. The Okasuicide weapon epitomized the kamikaze concept, earning the nickname Barker, Fool, from American sailors. This piloted bomb was equipped with a 1,200 kilogram warhead and powered by 3 solid-fuel rocket motors. With a maximum speed of 575 miles per hour during its terminal dive, it was engineered to be unstoppable once launched. However, its critical flaw was its limited range, just 10 miles, necessitating that vulnerable Betty bombers carry them directly into the heart of American defenses. The difference in defensive strategies couldn't have been more stark. American ships at Okinawa were arranged in concentric rings of defense, with radar picket destroyers positioned to provide early warnings and absorb the initial assaults. Each destroyer was equipped with 12 to 16 5-inch guns that could fire VT-fused shells, creating overlapping fields of fire. The proximity fuse turned these weapons from mere area denial systems into precision tools. A 5-inch VT shell had a lethal burst radius of 70 feet, while time-fused shells had only a 20-foot radius. More importantly, the fuse removed the need for the complex calculations necessary for traditional anti-aircraft fire, enabling gunners to engage targets as soon as they were spotted. The morning of April 6, 1945, would serve as the ultimate test for these systems. Operation Kikusui No. 1 involved 391 Navy planes and 133 Army planes, with 215 Navy and 82 Army planes being kamikazes, totaling 297 suicide aircraft in a single coordinated attack. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton of the USS Laffey later likened the incoming waves of kamikaze planes to a swarm of bees heading towards the only flower in a desert. The first wave hit at 0600, with radar operators detecting more than 50 aircraft coming in from the north. The picket destroyers opened fire at their maximum range of 12,000 yards using VT-fused shells. These proximity fuses proved to be devastatingly effective against the advancing formations. Each shell that came within lethal range of an aircraft detonated automatically, showering the sky with steel fragments. Unlike time-fused shells that needed accurate distance calculations, the VT fuses converted near misses into confirmed kills. Within minutes, numerous Japanese aircraft were plunging into the ocean, their suicide missions thwarted miles away from their intended targets. However, the kamikazes continued to attack. At 0744, the USS Laffey faced a concentrated assault from 22 aircraft over a span of 80 minutes. The destroyer's crew fired 345 rounds of 5-inch VT ammunition, successfully destroying 9 attackers. Thanks to the proximity fuses, Laffey's guns could engage multiple targets at once, quickly shifting focus between aircraft without the usual delays for fuse adjustments. When kamikaze pilots tried their common tactic of flying just above the waves to evade radar detection, the VT fuses remained effective, detonating when the shells came close to the water and creating bursts of shrapnel that tore apart low-flying planes. Despite this fierce defensive fire, Laffey was hit by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs but managed to endure, showcasing both American damage control efforts and how proximity fuses prevented many more attackers from reaching their target. The success of the VT fuse was no fluke. The technology had been covertly tested in combat since January 5, 1943, when the USS Helena launched the first proximity-fused shells during action near Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Red Cochrane, who was in charge of the aft 5-inch battery, managed to shoot down a Japanese-iced ED-3 Aveldive bomber with the second of 3 salvos. The shells exploded without needing direct hits, they merely needed to be close enough to activate the fuse and break the aircraft apart with shrapnel. This one achievement confirmed 3 years of rigorous development that had tackled seemingly unbeatable technical hurdles. The fuse housed around 130 electronic components that were miniaturized to fit in an area smaller than a pint milk bottle, with all parts crafted to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. During the Okinawa campaign, analysis after the battle showed the clear advantage of proximity-fused ammunition. Time-fused 5-inch shells needed an average of 1,162 rounds to take down a single kamikaze, while VT-fused shells cut that number down to 310 rounds per kill, marking almost a 4-fold increase in efficiency. Under ideal conditions, the results were even more striking. In May 1945, the destroyer escort USS Abercrombie managed to destroy a kamikaze with just 2 VT rounds. Similarly, the destroyer USS Morrison defended against a large kamikaze assault on May 4, shooting down 8 attackers within minutes using proximity-fused ammunition before being overrun by the sheer volume of enemy aircraft. The psychological effect of the proximity fuse on Japanese pilots was significant. Surviving kamikaze pilots who cut their mission short described the harrowing experience of flying towards American task forces through what felt like solid walls of exploding shells. The unique black clouds from VT explosions appeared with alarming precision, as though American gunners could predict exactly where each plane would be. Japanese tactical doctrine had relied on the belief that high-speed, low-altitude approaches would reduce the risk of anti-aircraft fire. However, the proximity fuse completely undermined this strategy. Shells that would have missed by 50 feet with standard fuses now exploded nearby, transforming the final approach into a perilous path of carefully timed blasts. Vice Admiral Mato Mugarki, overseeing kamikaze operations from Kyushu, recorded in his diary the increasingly devastating effectiveness of American anti-aircraft defenses. By late April 1945, Japanese naval intelligence estimated that fewer than 1 in 4 kamikaze planes were hitting their targets, a drop from 1 in 3 during the Philippines campaign. This decline was mainly attributed to what Japanese reports referred to as a new type of anti-aircraft shells that appeared to explode with incredible precision. Mugarki noted that the enemy's defensive firepower had significantly increased. Our special attack aircraft are being destroyed at distances we once thought were safe. Individual American sailors manning the 5-inch guns with VT ammunition became legends within their task forces. On the destroyer USS W. Hadley during the May 11 attack, gun crews reported 17 confirmed kamikaze kills using proximity-fused ammunition. The gunners developed a method of tracking kamikaze planes with sustained fire, creating a wall of VT that the attacking aircraft had to navigate through. Their crews could fire 15 rounds per minute, with each shell featuring its own electronic guidance system to target the enemy. In one intense 52-minute stretch, W. Hadley's guns took out several kamikazes in quick succession, with proximity fuses ensuring that even shells that passed above or below the rapidly dodging planes would still explode effectively. The experience of USS Aaron Ward during the May 3 attack showcases how proximity fuses acted as a force multiplier. When 40 kamikaze aircraft targeted the destroyer, her 5-inch batteries maintained continuous fire for 52 minutes. The VT-fused shells completely obliterated 6 attackers and severely damaged 5 others, causing them to crash into the sea. Commander William Sanders later stated that without the proximity fuses, his ship would have been overwhelmed within the first 10 minutes. The capability to engage targets without needing exact range finding enabled Aaron Ward's guns to quickly switch between various threats, a feat that wasn't possible with time-fused ammunition. Such experiences were echoed throughout the entire fleet. During the 10 significant Kikusui operations from April 6 to June 22, 1945, Japanese forces launched around 1,900 aircraft in coordinated kamikaze assaults. American naval forces, mainly employing VT-fused 5-inch shells, managed to destroy hundreds of these attackers before they could hit their targets. Data from the Operations Research Group indicated that ships using proximity-fused ammunition were 3 times more likely to withstand concentrated kamikaze attacks compared to those that mainly used conventional ammo. The introduction of proximity fuses turned a potentially disastrous tactical advancement into a significant yet controllable threat. As the campaign unfolded, the differences in technological adaptation became clear. American forces consistently improved their tactics with proximity fuses, finding that VT shells were especially effective when fired in patterns that generated overlapping fields of fragments. Ships started to coordinate their fire to create these VT boxes, forcing kamikaze aircraft to navigate through them. Meanwhile, the Japanese could only adapt their tactics with variations such as dawn assaults, multi-directional strategies, and a mix of conventional and kamikaze planes, none of which could match the inherent advantage of shells that detonated at the right moment. The production figures illustrated the peak of industrial warfare. By June 1945, American factories were churning out 70,000 proximity fuses daily. Over the course of the war, more than 22 million fuses were produced, costing over $1 billion in 1940s dollars, which is about $15 billion today. The Crosley Corporation alone had a workforce of 10,000, operating 3 shifts every day of the week. The cost per fuse plummeted from $732 in 1942 to just $18 by 1945, thanks to efficiencies gained through mass production. This substantial investment paid off when Navy assessments revealed that proximity fuses saved dozens of ships during the Okinawa campaign alone. The Japanese industrial capacity, severely weakened by strategic bombing and resource limitations, couldn't match this technology. Although Japanese scientists grasped the concept of proximity fuses, German reports on Allied special ammunition had only reached Japan through submarines. They didn't have the industrial framework to develop and mass-produce such advanced devices. The vacuum tube technology needed precise manufacturing skills that Japan's war-crippled industry couldn't provide. Additionally, Japanese radar development, essential for grasping proximity fuse principles, lagged far behind American systems. The Type 22 radar, Japan's most sophisticated naval system, operated at a wavelength that made miniaturization unfeasible, even if there had been the manufacturing capability. The impact of the proximity fuse shaped Japanese tactical strategy in the later stages of the campaign. By May 1945, kamikaze pilots were directed to approach American task forces at the highest possible altitude before diving straight down onto their targets, aiming to reduce their exposure to VT-fused anti-aircraft fire. This tactical change, while it decreased losses during the approach, made accurate targeting nearly impossible. Ships could adjust their positions away from the dive path, and the high-altitude approach allowed radar operators more time to identify incoming aircraft. Unfortunately, this attempted solution backfired. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, who led the amphibious forces at Okinawa, credited proximity fuses with making the invasion feasible. In a letter to the Chief of Naval Operations, he stated that without the VT fuse, our losses from suicide attacks would have been overwhelming. The Japanese kamikaze posed a serious threat that could have altered the course of the Pacific War if it weren't for our technological edge in anti-aircraft defense. Admiral Mark Mitchell echoed this view, noting that his flagship, the USS Bunker Hill, survived a devastating kamikaze attack on May 11, in part because proximity-fused fire took out 3 other attackers that could have finished off the damaged carrier. Admiral Arleigh Burke, Mitchell's chief of staff, later reflected on the effectiveness of proximity fuses in a 1978 interview. When I served as chief of staff to Admiral Mitchell, who led the fast carrier task forces, all the 5-inch 38 and 5-inch 25 ammunition was equipped with VT fuses. As you know, those fuses took down enemy planes by the dozens. Without those fuses, our losses and casualties among the fast carriers in the latter half of the war would have been significantly higher. The effect of proximity fuses went beyond just numbers. This technology fundamentally changed the morale equation that made kamikaze tactics effective. Japanese military strategy relied on the assumption that the guaranteed death of their pilots would be countered by a high likelihood of striking enemy ships. However, when success rates fell below 20% due to the proximity fuse attacks, the exchange became unfeasible, even within the harsh logic of suicide warfare. Young Japanese pilots, many of whom were university students drafted into special attack units, began to realize that their deaths would likely serve no purpose. Letters uncovered after the war showed a growing awareness among kamikaze pilots that American defenses had advanced beyond what their commanders had claimed. Lieutenant Yukio Seki, who led the first official kamikaze unit in October 1944, had achieved significant success against escort carriers in the late Gulf when proximity fuses made up only 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition. By the time of Okinawa, his successors were confronted with a fundamentally different situation. Lieutenant Commander Goro Nanaka, leading the Thunder God's Corps with Oka flying bombs, lost his entire squadron on March 21, 1945, with not a single Oka reaching the launch position. American pilots, assisted by radar intercept officers, shot down all 18 Betty bombers. Even if the bombers had managed to get through, the dense wall of VT-fused anti-aircraft fire would have been impossible to penetrate. The advanced technology of the proximity fuse showcased not just superior manufacturing but also significant breakthroughs in electronics, materials science, and systems integration that Japan couldn't replicate. The compact vacuum tubes made by Sylvania and Raytheon utilized special glass formulations designed to endure extreme shocks. The battery system, triggered by the force of firing, contained an electrolyte that remained stable for months and activated instantly when required. The radio frequency was carefully calculated to reduce interference while enhancing detection range. Each component reflected years of dedicated research fueled by abundant funding. In contrast, Japan's anti-aircraft defenses were still quite basic. The Type 98 100mm anti-aircraft gun, Japan's most advanced heavy AA weapon, depended on mechanical time fuses that had to be manually set before firing. Japanese naval forces at Okinawa, including the super battleship Yamato during its last mission, carried anti-aircraft ammunition that was on par with what Americans had used at Pearl Harbor. When Yamato confronted over 300 American aircraft on April 7, 1945, her 162 anti-aircraft guns unleashed thousands of rounds but managed to shoot down fewer than 10 enemy planes. The Americans lost only 10 aircraft while sinking the largest battleship in history, highlighting a clear technological gap. The proximity fuse also allowed for tactical innovations that conventional ammunition could not achieve. American destroyers implemented the VT umbrella technique, firing proximity-fused shells in specific patterns above friendly ships under assault. The shells detonated at set distances, forming a protective dome of fragments that kamikaze aircraft had to navigate through. This method was especially effective against the Oka flying bombs, which were so fast they were nearly impossible to track with standard fire control, but they were vulnerable to the barrier of fragments created by the VT patterns. Throughout the Okinawa campaign, which lasted from April 1 to June 22, 1945, the United States Navy fired around 150,000 proximity-fused 5-inch shells. Their effectiveness was clear. While VT-fused ammunition made up 45% of the heavy anti-aircraft rounds used, it was responsible for the majority of confirmed kamikaze kills at greater distances. In contrast, time-fused shells, which accounted for 55% of the total ammunition fired, were mainly effective at close range, where precision was less critical. The calculations indicated that proximity fuses were about 3 to 4 times more effective than traditional ammunition in countering kamikaze assaults. The difference in human cost was striking as well. Ships that ran out of VT ammunition and switched back to time-fused shells experienced much higher casualty rates in later attacks. The destroyer USS Drexler, which had used up her proximity-fused ammunition on May 28, was sunk in under a minute by 2 kamikaze planes that would likely have been eliminated by VT fire. The 158 lives lost represented more casualties than many destroyers faced during entire campaigns while using sufficient proximity-fused ammunition. Admiral Raymond Spruance, the 5th Fleet commander, encountered the kamikaze threat firsthand when his flagship, the USS Indianapolis, was struck in March, leading him to transfer to the USS New Mexico, which was also hit in May. He later noted, "This is my second encounter with a suicide plane hitting my own ship, and I have witnessed 4 other ships being struck nearby." The suicide plane is an extremely potent weapon that we should not overlook. However, Spruance also understood that without proximity fuses, the impact of the kamikaze would have been much worse. The VT fuse has saved numerous ships and lives. It represents the difference between manageable and unbearable losses. The strategic consequences were evident to military strategists preparing for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. Intelligence estimates suggested that Japan had set aside around 10,000 aircraft for kamikaze assaults on the invasion fleet. Nevertheless, American military planners, confident in the effectiveness of proximity fuses, calculated that they could meet defensive needs. Plans were in place to ramp up VT fuse production to 100,000 units per day by September 1945. New Mark 53 and Mark 58 fuses, featuring enhanced sensitivity and reliability, were beginning mass production. The invasion fleet was set to carry over 1 million proximity-fused shells, establishing an anti-aircraft defense unmatched in military history. However, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 brought an end to the war before this pivotal test could take place. Nevertheless, the influence of proximity fuses on Japanese surrender considerations should not be overlooked. Japanese military evaluations obtained after the war recognized the futility of mounting a successful defense against an invasion fleet shielded by what they referred to as electronic shells. Admiral Somo Toyota, the head of the Naval General Staff, testified post-war that the Japanese Navy estimated that kamikaze attacks for homeland defense would achieve less than a 10% success rate against proximity fuse defenses, a figure that rendered the tactic militarily ineffective. Post-war evaluations uncovered the complete extent of the proximity fuse's success. The initiative had engaged 112 companies alongside the primary contractors, establishing an industrial network focused on producing the era's most advanced military electronics. British scientists, who had first imagined the proximity fuse in 1940 but were unable to secure funding for its development, recognized that American industrial strength had accomplished what they thought was unachievable. The British believed that ensuring vacuum tubes could withstand gun launches was impossible. American engineers demonstrated otherwise. The proximity fuse's effectiveness against kamikaze assaults shaped military technology advancements for many years to come. The concept of smart munitions, which are weapons capable of autonomous decision-making, became a key element of American military strategy. Contemporary anti-aircraft missiles utilize proximity fusing developed from the VT fuse, and the failsafe close-in weapon systems that protect modern warships are based on techniques first used during the kamikaze attacks. The technological edge that replaced human guidance with electronic intelligence created a framework that still influences military tactics today. Japanese veterans interviewed after the conflict voiced their astonishment at American proximity fuse technology, with Commander Tadashi Nakajima, who played a role in launching the kamikaze program, acknowledging, "We recognized the Americans had advanced technology, but the proximity fuse was beyond what we could ever conceive. Our pilots reported that shells were exploding right where they flew, almost as if guided by unseen forces. This not only destroyed our aircraft but also shattered the core belief that spiritual strength could overcome material disadvantages." Captain Ayukiro Gio, an early supporter of kamikaze tactics, survived the war and later reflected on the influence of the proximity fuse. "We thought that a willingness to die would ensure victory. However, the American electronic fuse demonstrated that technology could triumph over even the most resolute human sacrifice. It was more than just a weapon, it was a commentary on the essence of modern warfare." The difference between the proximity fuse and kamikaze attacks highlighted fundamentally opposing views on the value of human life and the role of technology in combat. The American commitment to saving lives through advanced technology contrasted sharply with the Japanese approach of using life itself as a weapon. The introduction of the proximity fuse made kamikaze attacks less deadly for American forces, undermining the harsh rationale that led young Japanese men to embrace death. In this regard, the electronic fuse symbolized not only technological advancement but also a moral viewpoint on warfare. The impact of the proximity fuse in countering kamikaze attacks goes beyond just military history. The rapid development program that produced the VT fuse set a precedent for later American innovations, from the space race to contemporary computing. The partnership among universities, private companies, and military needs that resulted in 22 million advanced electronic devices under wartime stress showcased American organizational prowess, which would shape the post-war period. The Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, where the proximity fuse was refined, continued to be a hub for military technology advancements, developing everything from guided missiles to satellite navigation systems. Dr. Merle Tuve, who spearheaded the proximity fuse project, later reflected on their success. "We saved lives by enhancing the effectiveness of weapons. Every kamikaze aircraft intercepted by a proximity fuse meant that American sailors could return home to their families. That was worth any effort and expense." His team's achievements confirmed the American strategy of using scientific knowledge to tackle military challenges, a philosophy that would shape defense tactics throughout the Cold War. For the Japanese, the failure of kamikaze strategies against proximity fuse defenses signified the collapse of their beliefs in spiritual superiority over material shortcomings. The young pilots who lost their lives in pointless assaults on walls of VT-fused explosions became symbols not of heroic sacrifice, but of military leadership that failed to grasp technological realities. Modern Japan's focus on technological advancement and innovation can be partly attributed to the harsh lessons learned in 1945, when electronic fuses outperformed human pilots with mechanical accuracy. The mathematical success of the proximity fuse, 310 rounds needed per kill compared to 1162 for time-fused shells, translated into saved ships, preserved lives, and ultimately strategic success. Each functioning VT fuse meant an American sailor returning home, a ship that would continue to fight, and evidence that technology could deliver a crucial advantage in modern warfare. The confirmed destruction of hundreds of kamikaze planes by proximity fuses before they reached their targets translated into thousands of American lives saved, numerous ships protected, and a testament to the billion-dollar investment in electronic warfare. The narrative of technology triumphing over fatalism peaked in the waters of Okinawa, where radar-guided fighters, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, and advanced damage control systems successfully countered intentional suicide attacks. The kamikaze pilots, courageous young men sacrificed to a doomed cause, flew into an electronic kill zone their commanders never foresaw. While their deaths caused tactical damage that shocked American sailors, they did not accomplish the strategic aim of making the costs of invasion unbearable. Throughout the Okinawa campaign, Japanese kamikaze attacks resulted in the sinking of 36 American ships and damage to 368 others. Although these losses were devastating, they highlighted the survival of most ships that were attacked, a survival rate that would have been unthinkable without proximity fuses. The 40,907 American sailors who died from kamikaze attacks at Okinawa marked the Navy's deadliest battle, but this number was only a small fraction of the casualties that traditional analysis had predicted without VT technology. Japanese losses were total, with around 1,900 aircraft and pilots used in coordinated kamikaze assaults during the 10 Kikusui operations, along with hundreds more in makeshift suicide missions, yielding tactical outcomes that significantly missed strategic goals. The effectiveness of proximity fuses against kamikaze attacks illustrated that in modern warfare, technological advantages could surpass benefits from sheer numbers, resolve, or even the willingness to sacrifice oneself. Each fuse weighed under 5 pounds, housed 130 electronic components made for $18 by 1945, and could operate for less than 30 seconds to obliterate a kamikaze aircraft along with its pilot, representing years of training, tons of aluminum and steel, and most heartbreakingly, a human life that could never be replaced. When applied to thousands of encounters across the Pacific theater, this equation resulted in American victory through technological dominance that shaped the war's outcome. The success of proximity fuses against kamikaze assaults affirmed the entire American strategy for warfare in the 20th century. Investment in technology, confidence in industrial production, and the belief that superior equipment could prevail over fanatical resolve were proven right in the most extreme circumstances. For Japan, the failure of kamikaze tactics against proximity-fused defenses signified not only a military loss but also a challenge to fundamental beliefs about spirit overcoming physical limitations. The electronic fuses had triumphed over the divine wind, demonstrating that in the harsh reality of modern warfare, advanced technology would outshine human sacrifice. American technological expertise outmatched Japanese self-sacrifice. The effectiveness of VT fuses at Okinawa showcased that technological superiority was the key to military success. The differences in American and Japanese strategies for anti-aircraft defense illustrate a broader narrative about industrial warfare in the 20th century. Nations that could leverage scientific knowledge, manufacturing strength, and organizational skills to create superior military technologies enjoyed overwhelming benefits. The proximity fuses epitomized American strengths in innovative engineering, mass production, and systematic problem-solving applied to military issues. Their success against kamikaze attacks definitively showed that in modern warfare, victory belonged to those who could think, innovate, and utilize better technology. The precise performance of proximity fuses, which were 3 to 4 times more effective than traditional munitions and reduced rounds needed per kill by 73%, saved countless ships and translated into a strategic triumph that safeguarded American lives while overcoming a resolute enemy. This advantage, amplified across the extensive Pacific theater, contributed to American victory and established technological supremacy as the cornerstone of post-war military strategy. The electronic fuses not only defeated the kamikaze but also confirmed the entire American approach to warfare through superior technology, demonstrating unequivocally that in critical situations, the quality of equipment could outweigh the quantity of sacrifice.